I'm Sophie, I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how I used my sister's own words to stop her from stealing my inheritance. The room was silent except for the rustle of papers. My lawyer slid a thick folder across the polished oak table. Across from me, my sister's confident smirk began to falter. I could see her scanning the pages, her eyes darting to her solicitor, searching for a lifeline. But the lifeline wasn't coming. Every email, every word, every manipulation she had typed was now printed in black and white, in front of a notary, 2 attorneys, and the executor of our late father's estate. She knew then, without a single word spoken, that she had lost. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't gloat. I simply said, "You wrote this, remember," and watched the color drain from her face. 2 months earlier, I never would have imagined things would end here. Back then, I was still grieving. My father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack, and my life was a haze of funeral arrangements, legal documents, and trying to adjust to a world without him. He wasn't just my father, he was my anchor. I thought my sister, Emily, felt the same way. We'd always been close on the surface, though in hindsight, I realized there had always been cracks. She was charming, ambitious, and could make anyone feel like they were her best friend. But when she wanted something, she had a way of making it hers, whether it belonged to her or not. Our father's will was straightforward. He had worked hard his entire life, running a modest but profitable antique furniture business, and left everything equally to his 2 daughters. The house, the savings, and the business, split 50-50. That's what he wanted. Simple, fair, and clear. I was content with that. I wasn't thinking about money, I was thinking about memories. The old mahogany desk where he taught me to write my name. The kitchen table that had seen decades of family dinners. The creaky chair he'd sit in with a book every Sunday afternoon. These weren't just assets to me, they were pieces of him. The first red flag appeared just a week after the funeral. Emily called me late at night. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but with an undertone I recognized, persuasion mode. She started talking about streamlining the estate process. "It's silly for us to get 2 separate lawyers," she said. "We should just use mine, save money, and get things wrapped up fast." On the surface, it sounded reasonable. But my gut tightened. I'd seen her use this exact tactic before, with boyfriends, with employers, with me. Control the advisor, control the outcome. I told her politely that I'd stick with the lawyer Dad's friend had recommended. She went quiet for a beat before saying, "Fine, but don't say I didn't try to make this easy for you." Things escalated quickly after that. Emily began sending me updates about the estate, documents she claimed her lawyer had drafted, valuations she said were approved, and suggestions about how to divide things efficiently. Funny thing was, all of these suggestions ended with her keeping the house and the business, while I would get a lump sum payout that was mysteriously much lower than half the estate's value. When I questioned her numbers, she laughed it off. "Sophie, you don't understand how property taxes work. You'll thank me later." The overreach moment came 2 weeks later. My lawyer forwarded me an email chain that Emily had mistakenly CC'd him on. In it, she was discussing with her lawyer how to pressure Sophie into accepting a quick cash settlement and frame it as helping her avoid the hassle of running a business. There it was, in plain text, her plan to push me out entirely. The language was so condescending it made my blood boil. She described me as too soft to handle negotiations and the type to fold under pressure if we act competent. I tried to take the high road first. I invited her to meet for coffee and talk things through. I told her I wanted us both to honor Dad's wishes without tearing the family apart. She listened, nodded, and smiled, and the next day, I got another email from her lawyer with an even lower final offer. It was clear, she didn't want peace, she wanted control. That was the moment I decided this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about boundaries. This was about respect. And if Emily thought I was too soft to fight back, then she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Emily didn't call me for 2 days after the coffee meeting, which would have worried me in the past. Silence used to mean I'd offended her somehow and needed to fix it. Now, silence sounded like planning. On the third morning, a courier arrived at my door with a thick envelope and a cheerful signature please. Inside was what she labeled a memorandum of understanding, pre-filled with my full name, my father's case number, and neat little boxes where I was expected to initial away my rights. The numbers were even worse than the final offer from the day before. She'd reduced my share to a flat cash payment that barely covered half the liquid assets, not counting the house or the business at all, as if those were already hers by divine right. The best part? A line that said by signing I acknowledge the house and company would be managed solely by in accordance with her father's unwritten intentions. Unwritten intentions. I could almost hear Dad laughing at the phrase from wherever he was. I forwarded the papers to my solicitor and took a breath before calling Emily. She answered with that faux bright voice that can slice you without a single swear. So glad you got it. It's just a formality to keep probate clean, she chirped. I told her I wouldn't sign anything that contradicted the will. She sighed like a schoolteacher disappointed in a slow pupil and said I was being emotional. Then she added the first threat dressed as kindness: if this drags, the business suffers, and the house goes cold. Heating, maintenance, insurance, it's a lot. I'm just trying to protect our assets. There it was, the squeeze. I said I'd take responsibility for my decisions. She said, softly, you always do, and hung up. I stared at the blank screen and thought, I won't be the blank space you write on. 2 days later we met at the shop. Calling it a shop makes it sound smaller than it felt. It was our father's second home, a deep L-shaped showroom with a workshop at the back, the air perfumed with beeswax and old wood. I found Emily measuring the long farmhouse table Dad restored last winter, the one he promised would be mine if I ever wanted it for my tiny place. She greeted me with a kiss and a tape measure snapping at her wrist. Without asking, she started walking me through her plan to modernize. Sell the table, sell 2 Victorian wardrobes, digitize the book of invoices, and outsource the refinishing to some subcontractor she knew from a networking brunch. I listened until the part where she said, we'll need to transfer the accounts to my sole signatory to keep purchases smooth. Then I stopped listening. I asked where she got the authority for that. She smiled. From being the only one who understands what this place needs. I looked past her at Dad's stool by the lathe. It felt like he was watching to see what I would do next. The first real lunch came by email that night. My bank flagged an attempted change to the business account's secondary contact, my name replaced by hers, using a PDF with what looked like my signature. The notification asked me to confirm. I didn't confirm. I called the bank's fraud line, then my solicitor, then the executor. The bank froze the change and logged the metadata of the uploaded file. The executor, Mr. Penfold, asked me to forward everything. I did, with a calm that surprised me. It's easy to be calm when someone else writes your villain's monologue for you in a forged scrawl. I kept the notification. I saved the call logs. I wrote down the exact time I had been at home, eating soup, when someone pretending to be me had signed a form across town. The next morning Emily sent a group email to our aunt, 2 cousins, and me, subject line, quick update re, Dad's wishes. She wrote about respecting the spirit of his legacy and how he always wanted the house to be a place for family, which she cleverly framed as her living there to keep it from feeling empty. She wrote about how the business ran through her veins, and how she hoped I would support her by accepting a fair cash disbursement. She didn't copy the executor. She did copy 3 people who had no role in probate and every incentive to text me, "Why are you being difficult?" I didn't respond to her letter. I called the executor and asked for an inventory date with a neutral appraiser present. He agreed. The appraiser, an older woman with a pencil behind her ear and a habit of talking to the furniture, set a day and time and asked for uninterrupted access. I emailed Emily to confirm. She replied within minutes, of course. Transparency is key. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. Transparency lasted exactly 12 hours. When the appraiser and I arrived at the shop, the back room was in chaos. Boxes were open, small tagged items were missing from shelves, and the cash tin was on its side with the coins scooped out. Emily swept in 10 minutes late with a latte and a shrug. "I thought I'd get a jump on consolidating smaller pieces," she said. The appraiser, professional to the bone, asked for the itemized inventory log. Emily produced a hand-typed list that didn't match Dad's ledger. The appraiser's pencil hovered in the air, then made a steady line on her clipboard. I took photos of every shelf, every empty hook. I didn't accuse. I didn't need to. When we got to Dad's stool by the lathe, the appraiser paused and murmured, almost to herself, "This man loved these tools." I swallowed hard. The pencil made another mark. That afternoon, Emily attempted a charm offensive. She invited me to dinner to reset. We picked a busy bistro near the river, neutral ground with good lighting, which somehow felt important. She opened with an apology that wasn't one. "I'm sorry you're feeling overwhelmed by all this," she said. I replied that I was fine, and that the appraiser would send her report to the executor. Emily's eyes cooled. "You know, Sophie, you always were better at studying than doing." Dad leaned on me for the day-to-day. I said, very evenly, Dad leaned on honesty. For a second she flinched. Then she told me she'd spoken to her lawyer about accelerating distribution if I kept delaying. I asked how asking for an inventory was a delay. She said delays can be perception. I sipped my water, feeling the steel slide into place inside me. The micro hook in my head clicked. She thinks perception can beat paper. She doesn't know I'm collecting paper. The peace attempt everyone would later ask me about happened the following morning. I wrote Emily a clean, firm email, copy to the executor and both solicitors. I laid out 3 points. We follow the will as written, we wait for the official valuation, and we make no unilateral changes to accounts, inventory, or property. I included a kind line about wanting us both to feel safe and respected during a painful time. It was the kind of message you send when you're trying to give someone a runway to land the plane without crashing. Emily replied in 9 minutes with a paragraph that danced, sparkled, and then set itself on fire. She accused me of weaponizing bureaucracy, called the appraiser your pet, and ended with, "If you keep lawyering this, I'll have no choice but to take steps you won't like." That was the moment the peace attempt ended. I watched the cursor blink after my last, "Thank you for your prompt reply," and I knew we weren't arguing about a table or a house anymore. We were arguing about gravity. The doubling down phase began with small, mean acts designed to teach me a lesson. The heating at the house accidentally went off during a cold snap, risking damp in the woodwork, which would mysteriously lower the valuation. A client of Dad's, Mr. K, called me to ask why Emily told him I'd be liquidating inventory at clearance prices to cover taxes, a sentence so absurd I nearly laughed. A parcel addressed to the company containing antique brass poles was redirected to Emily's flat, then redelivered to the shop with a sticky note, "Thought these were mine." Each incident was minor enough to brush off. Together they formed a pattern that looks like intent when you line it up on a page. So I did. I wrote the dates and details in a simple table, printed it, and slid it into a folder I had labeled, privately, and with a hint of black humor, gravity. Her overreach came on a bright Wednesday, the kind of sharp blue day that makes you forget how bad people can be. The executor called to ask if I had authorized a family occupancy addendum on the house insurance listing Emily as the primary resident. I had not. He forwarded the request. It came from Emily's personal email and included a sentence about all parties agreeing in principle that will retain the primary residence. I replied all with the will attached, highlighted, and a single sentence, "We have not agreed to any such principle." Then, very quietly, I asked the executor if our communications could move to a shared folder where all parties' messages and attachments would be timestamped and preserved. He loved the idea. Emily did not. She wrote back that I was creating unnecessary admin and drowning a grieving family in paperwork. The shared folder went live that afternoon. Every file had a date. Every click left a footprint. The predictable smear campaign fired up that evening. A cousin texted to say he'd heard I was selling dad's tools to strangers on Facebook. I asked for a screenshot. He sent one, a post from an anonymous account in a local group warning people that someone was flipping a late craftsman's equipment for greedy profit. The item photos were indeed dad's, stolen directly from our private inventory album. The watermark was cropped. I took a breath, saved the images, and wrote to the group's admin from the business account with proof of the lie. The post vanished within an hour. My cousin apologized. I told him I loved him and to please come to me before believing street gossip next time. He sent a heart emoji and the matter died. What didn't die were the screenshots, which joined the other small stones in gravity. Through all of this, I kept my voice level and my face clean. I brought biscuits to the executor's office and asked sensible questions. I thanked the appraiser for her time and sent her a follow-up list of items she might have missed, with serial numbers and dad's notes. I made Tifa the locksmith when we changed the shop's back door, yes, with the executor's written permission, and photographed the new keys. I became the most boring, reliable person in the process, a trick Dad taught me without saying a word. People trust boring in a storm. They cling to it. They tell boring things the truth. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. Be the calm in the chaos. The last straw, the one that rearranged the molecules in my resolve, arrived on a Sunday evening in the form of a reply all from Emily that wasn't meant for me. She had tried to forward my email to her solicitor with a snide note about Sophie's little spreadsheet, and instead sent it to the shared folder. Her comment, "Don't worry, we'll overwhelm her with process and she'll fold." The choice of overwhelm was almost tender in its cruelty, like she knew exactly where my nurse lived. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the cursor blink over those words, then I created a new subfolder, named it Communications, and moved her message there along with the CC'd headers and the server timestamp. Then I made tea. Then I called my solicitor and said, very calmly, that I was ready to proceed to the letter before action stage if necessary. He said he thought we wouldn't need it. He said we had something better. He said, let's keep reading. If you're waiting for the dramatic moment where I slammed a fist on a table, it didn't happen. There was no shouting. There was only paper, and patience, and a willingness to be underestimated one more week. The failure of peace wasn't something I celebrated. It felt like a funeral after the funeral. But it also cleared the air. I stopped trying to save the version of Emily I wished I had and started preparing to meet the version I actually had. A plan began to form, quiet, neat, and thoroughly boring on the outside. Inside, it was sharp. And here's the funny part about writing things down: paper doesn't care who's charming. It doesn't blush. It doesn't promise to fix everything next week. It just sits there until someone reads it out loud in a room where the stakes are high and the sunlight is cruel. Paper doesn't lie when people do. That's when I realized what my ace card would look like. Not a confrontation. Not a scene. A reading. The shift from defense to offense happened quietly, almost without me noticing. One moment I was just collecting emails and taking notes, the next, I was actively thinking about how to present them in a way that would leave no room for escape. My solicitor, Mr. Hale, had the patience of a chess master. We're not just gathering proof, he told me over tea in his book-lined office. We're building a story that tells itself. He explained that in probate disputes, credibility is currency. If you can show a clear, consistent record of someone's intentions, especially in their own words, courts, executors, and mediators listen. And if you can show they tried to manipulate or mislead? Even better. That's why, he said, my decision to keep every single scrap was going to pay off. We began to sort my gravity folder into sections: direct statements, her own words about cutting me out, actions, attempted account changes, physical interference with property, misdirection, false updates, misleading family emails, and smears, the Facebook post, gossip. Mr. Hale insisted on printing hard copies of everything. Emails can vanish. Servers can fail. But ink on paper is stubborn. The pile grew so thick we had to use binder clips the size of my palm. It wasn't just evidence, it was a physical weight, the kind you could drop on a table and hear a satisfying thud. The plan was simple on the surface: request a formal meeting with the executor, both solicitors, and both beneficiaries present. Present the evidence in an order that made it impossible for Emily to spin. Start with her own words, escalate to actions, then close with proof of intent. Each section would have no commentary from me, just dates, documents, and her own voice on the page. Mr. Hale said the less I editorialized, the more powerful it would be. Let her try to explain why she wrote those things, he said, leaning back with a faint smile. People hang themselves with the rope they think they're using to pull you down. Timing was everything. We didn't want to show our hand too early, so we kept our responses to her provocations minimal. When she sent another friendly email suggesting I cash out now and enjoy life, I replied with a polite noted, "Thank you." When she attempted another minor change to the shop's insurance policy, we let the denial email from the insurer speak for itself. I wasn't giving her any hint that I was building something. I wanted her confident, overconfident. The more she believed I was just stubborn without strategy, the more careless she became. Then, a gift fell into my lap. One afternoon, while searching the shared folder for an old valuation report, I found a misfiled PDF. It was an email from Emily to her solicitor, but the attachment was a draft statement of agreement that had never been sent. In it, she'd typed a list of bullet points describing how she planned to frame me as the difficult sibling, including phrases like emotional instability, financial naivety, and poor understanding of business operations. It was like finding the blueprint to a con. The file's metadata showed it was created on her home laptop, 2 days after our coffee meeting. I saved it, printed it, and added it to the direct statement section. It was the kind of document lawyers dream about: specific, malicious, and clearly premeditated. Meanwhile, the executor, Mr. Penfold, was growing tired of the tension. He called both of us separately to say he wanted a resolution that honors the will and the family bond. Emily must have heard that as a sign she could push harder. I heard it as the perfect opening to suggest the meeting. I called him back and said I was ready to resolve things face to face, as long as both solicitors were present and the discussion was documented. He liked the idea. Emily agreed almost immediately, no doubt picturing herself charming her way through it. The date was set for 3 weeks later, giving me just enough time to polish every detail. Those 3 weeks were a masterclass in patience. Emily kept up her campaign, sprinkling in little digs to test my reactions. A cousin texted me, "Heard you're selling the shop's best pieces already?" A lie, clearly planted. The heating at the house mysteriously failed again, despite the repair bill from last month. And she sent one more generous offer, slightly higher than the last, to make herself look reasonable on paper. I said nothing beyond, "I'll review this with my solicitor." Every time she tried a new angle, I thought, another line in the story. Another brick in the wall she's building around herself. In the final days before the meeting, Mr. Hale and I rehearsed. He would introduce each document, read the relevant line aloud, and then hand it to me to slide across the table to the executor. We decided on a sequence that started with the seemingly harmless streamlined the process email, moved through the pressure her into a quick cash settlement chain, then landed hard with the forged signature attempt, the Facebook smear, and finally, the misfiled blueprint. It would be like tightening a vise, each term making it harder for her to wriggle out. One night, 2 days before the meeting, I found myself sitting at Dad's old desk with the binder open. The lamplight made the pages glow, and I ran my fingers over the lines where she'd written things she could never take back. I thought about the girl I grew up with, the sister who shared my room on stormy nights, who once braided my hair before a school dance. I wondered if she'd always had this in her, or if something had changed along the way. But then I remembered the feeling in my stomach the night she first suggested using her lawyer, that quiet tightening that told me I was prey in her eyes. That was the moment, even if I hadn't named it then. People don't become hunters overnight. The morning of the meeting, I dressed in simple navy, hair tied back, no jewelry except Dad's watch. I wanted to look unremarkable. Emily arrived in a tailored cream blazer, smiling like she was about to close a deal. We sat at opposite ends of the table. The executor cleared his throat, the solicitors nodded at each other, and Mr. Hale opened the binder. "We'd like to begin," he said, "by reviewing some communications relevant to the division of the estate." Emily leaned back in her chair, still confident. That was fine. Confidence was part of the trap. She didn't know that for the next hour, the only voice in the room we'd meet was hers, echoing back from the pages in front of her. The first page slid across the table with the faint hiss of paper on polished wood. Mr. Hale read it aloud, his tone neutral, almost bored, as if he were reciting a weather report. "It's silly for us to get two separate lawyers. We should just use mine, save money, and get things wrapped up fast." He looked up briefly. "This was sent to my client on March 12th, correct?" Emily nodded, smiling like she'd just been complimented. "Yes, I was just trying to be efficient," she said. Mr. Hale didn't respond, he simply turned the page. The second document was the March 19th email chain, the one she'd mistakenly copied to my lawyer. He read the line slowly, letting it hang in the air. "Pressure Sophie into accepting a quick cash settlement. Frame it as helping her avoid the hassle of running a business." Emily's smile wavered, just a flicker. "That's taken out of context," she began, but Mr. Hale cut in smoothly. "The context is the full chain, which is printed in your packet. Would you like me to read it all?" Her solicitor shifted in his chair, murmuring something I couldn't catch. Then came the forged signature attempt. The bank's notification printout, the metadata from the uploaded PDF, the denial confirmation. Hale laid them out in a neat fan, sliding them toward the executor. "This is my client's bank," flagging a change she did not authorize, he said. "The file used contains a scanned signature from a previous document, digitally pasted, and submitted from an IP address linked to Ms. EH's home internet service." Emily's voice rose a notch. "That's ridiculous, anyone could," but Hale's finger tapped the line with the timestamp and IP address. "The bank's fraud team disagrees." The Facebook smear was next. Screenshots, admin confirmation, and the cropped watermark photo side by side with the original from our private album. The executor's jaw tightened. He didn't look at Emily as Hale read the anonymous post aloud. "Flipping a late craftsman's equipment for greedy profit." My father's name wasn't in the text, but his tools in the photo made it obvious. Emily tried to laugh. That could have been anyone. Hale didn't even glance at her. The admin provided the account registration email. "It matches one of Ms. EH's secondary addresses." Then, the blueprint. The misfiled PDF with her bullet points: emotional instability, financial naivety, poor understanding of business operations. Hale didn't rush. He read each bullet slowly, as if they were items on a shopping list. When he finished, he closed the binder with a soft click. "This file," he said, "was created 2 days after a meeting where my client extended an olive branch. The metadata shows it originated from Ms. EH's personal laptop. It outlines a deliberate strategy to misrepresent my client to others involved in the estate." The room went still. You could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Emily's solicitor cleared his throat, clearly searching for a pivot, but Hale leaned forward, his voice calm. "We believe these documents demonstrate a sustained attempt to undermine the equal distribution of this estate as outlined in the will. My client's position is simple: we follow the will exactly as written. No alterations. No side agreements. Full transparency in valuation and asset division." The executor finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I agree. The will stands. There will be no further attempts to alter accounts, property designations, or valuations. Any such attempt will be considered a breach of process and dealt with accordingly." He didn't look at her when he said it, but the weight of the words landed on her shoulders all the same. Emily's face was a study in contradictions: tight smile, narrowed eyes, a flush creeping up her neck. She tried one last angle. "Sophie, we could have done this without dragging in all these people." I met her gaze and said the only thing I'd planned to say all morning: "You wrote this, remember?" I tapped the blueprint document with my finger. Every word. She didn't reply. She gathered her papers slowly, the cream blazer suddenly looking too bright for the dim room. Her solicitor murmured something about next steps, but it was obvious to everyone that there weren't many steps left for her to take. The meeting ended without ceremony. No handshakes, no small talk. Mr. Hale and I walked out together into the crisp afternoon air. He smiled faintly. That, he said, is how you let someone talk themselves into a corner. 2 days later, the executor sent an email to both parties confirming the distribution process was proceeding as per the will. No exceptions, no delays. The house, the business, the accounts, split evenly. Just as Dad intended. Emily didn't respond to the email. She couldn't change the will. She couldn't change the record. And she couldn't change the fact that her own words had closed the door she was trying to slip through. I didn't celebrate, not in the usual way. No champagne, no victory lap. Just a quiet evening at home, the binder on my kitchen table, and the knowledge that I'd done exactly what I needed to do, without crossing a single legal line. It wasn't about beating her. It was about keeping what was mine, and what Dad wanted me to have. In the days after the meeting, the tension in my shoulders began to loosen for the first time in months. There was no dramatic explosion from Emily, no desperate last-minute stunt, just silence. That silence was more telling than any angry email. It meant she knew she was finished. The executor kept things moving like a well-oiled machine, sending us both schedules for the valuation sign-offs, the property title updates, and the final business account reconciliation. Every step was documented, every signature witnessed. For the first time since Dad's funeral, I felt the process was in safe hands. Still, I wasn't naive. People like Emily don't always walk away gracefully, even when they've lost. So I stayed alert, watching for small ripples. A few weeks later, one arrived in the form of a text from our cousin. She's been telling people you lawyered her out of her share. I didn't bother defending myself, the will spoke louder than any rumor. I simply sent him a PDF of the executor's distribution summary. His reply was short, got it. End of story. That became my quiet mantra, end of story. When the day came to finalize the division, we met at the house for the last time. Walking through those rooms was strange. Each creak of the floorboards, each patch of faded wallpaper felt like a piece of my childhood. The kitchen smelled faintly of furniture polish and the faint citrus cleaner Dad always used. Emily was there, reserved but civil, packing up her half of the agreed items. We avoided unnecessary conversation. She took the living room set, the Persian rug from the dining room, and half the small collectibles. I took the mahogany desk, Dad's workshop tools, and the long farmhouse table he promised me. The split was even, but it still felt like I'd salvaged more than just objects, I'd salvaged meaning. The shop transfer was more bittersweet. I decided to keep it running, even though I knew it would mean long hours and a steep learning curve. I hired 2 of Dad's old apprentices to help, and they were thrilled. Your father would be proud, one of them said, patting the workbench. I didn't cry then, but later, when I closed the shop alone and turned off the lights, the tears came. It wasn't grief anymore, it was relief, mixed with something softer, like gratitude. Emily, for her part, stayed out of the shop entirely after the split. I'd half expected her to show up one last time, to make some pointed remark or drop a parting shot. Instead, she sent a one-line email, hope it works out for you. No warmth, no malice, just a thin line between us that would probably stay there for a long time. I replied with 2 words, it will. A few weeks later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Emily was already moving on to a new business venture with a friend, something about a home staging company. It didn't surprise me. She thrives on fresh projects and fresh people to impress. I wished her no harm, but I also didn't wish her well in the way I used to. It's hard to root for someone who tried to burn your house down while smiling. In quieter moments, I thought about Dad and how he would have handled this. He hated drama but valued fairness more than harmony. He used to say, harmony without fairness is just silence before a storm. I finally understood what he meant. Protecting his legacy wasn't about keeping peace at any cost, it was about honoring the principles he lived by, even if it meant standing alone. Life settled into a new rhythm. I spent my mornings at the shop, afternoons handling paperwork or deliveries, and evenings restoring pieces with my own hands. There was a satisfaction in running the business that went deeper than profit. It was like carrying on a conversation with him through wood, varnish, and grain. Sometimes customers would tell me stories about buying from Dad years ago, and I'd tuck those memories away like precious keepsakes. Every so often, I'd open the gravity binder, not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of something essential: that preparation is power. In the beginning, I'd felt powerless, confused, and cornered. But by staying calm, documenting everything, and refusing to be rushed into bad decisions, I turned the tide without stepping outside the law. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't cinematic in the Hollywood sense. But it was real, and it worked. One evening, about 3 months after the meeting, Mr. Hale stopped by the shop to drop off some final documents. We sat at the farmhouse table, drinking tea, while he signed the last of the probate paperwork. He glanced around the shop, smiling faintly. "You did more than just win, Sophie," he said. "You protected the future." I realized then that this wasn't just the end of a battle, it was the start of something I could build on. I locked the shop that night with a lighter step, Dad's watch ticking steadily on my wrist. The storm had passed, the air was clear, and I knew exactly what came next. Not revenge, not resentment, just living well, on my own terms, with what was rightfully mine. In the months that followed, life became gentle in ways I hadn't known for years. I woke before the sun, opened the shop, and turned the key without that old pinch of dread. Sawdust rose like a small golden storm when I sanded a tabletop, and in that steady rhythm I could hear my father's laugh again. Customers lingered longer, not because of any sales trick, but because a place built on honesty has a way of feeling warm. When I counted the till at closing, I didn't think about who tried to take it, I thought about who built it, and who keeps it safe now. People asked how I stayed calm through it all, as if calm were a personality trait instead of a decision. I kept telling them the truth, I wasn't calm at first. I was hurt, scared, and angry. Then I did a small, ordinary thing that changed everything. I wrote things down. A photo here, a timestamp there, a name on a delivery label, each dull little fact turned the chaos into a map I could follow. It's not dramatic to keep records, it's just mature. And maturity is underrated when the other side is betting on your panic. One Saturday, a woman came in clutching a magazine photo of a refinished chest and said, "Can you make this feel like my grandmother's house?" I said yes, because I knew I could. I knew I could keep promises now, to strangers and to myself, because I'd learned to keep the biggest one: I will not abandon my boundaries to buy peace. Boundaries are love with a backbone. I didn't say that out loud, of course. I just gave her a delivery date and wrote it, neatly, in the ledger that sits where my father's ledger used to be. I do see Emily now and then, at weddings, at a cousin's christening, in the kind of rooms where you hold a glass with 2 hands to keep them busy. We exchange polite remarks that mean nothing and everything. She's always well dressed, always a little rushed, always on her way to somewhere shinier. Sometimes I think about asking her if she ever rereads her own emails and feels that small heat of shame. Then I remember that shame is private work. It happens in bathrooms and at red lights, not at buffet tables. My work is different. My work is to live well and leave doors open that can stay open safely. The shop has its own new rituals now. On Fridays we sweep the sawdust into one big pile and slap a silly gold sticker on the dustpan like a trophy. On Sundays I leave a handwritten note on the counter for Monday's me, something tiny and kind: change the sander pad, call Mrs. Avery, eat lunch before 3. It's a way of telling myself I'm on my own side. If this whole ordeal taught me anything, it's that self-trust is not a feeling, it's a ledger of small kept promises. Keep your own receipts. Every quarter I back up everything: accounts, invoices, photos of high-value pieces, on 2 drives and a cloud folder shared with my accountant. I don't do it because I'm afraid of another fight. I do it because order is freedom. When the numbers are clear, the mind is clear, and clear minds make good lives. People think revenge is a firework, all noise and light. But the best kind is quieter. It looks like stability. It smells like beeswax. It sounds like a key turning smoothly in a well-kept lock. On the 1-year mark of Dad's passing, I closed early and brought the farmhouse table into the front window. It was the last thing he worked on, and now it's the first thing people see. I brewed tea and sat alone with the lights low, watching the street go soft at dusk. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. Justice had happened in rooms with ugly carpet and dry air, with staplers and timestamps and a lawyer who knew the value of silence. Relief arrived not as a parade, but as a quiet evening where nothing hurt and nothing was missing. A client once told me, in that offhand way people say true things, that the opposite of manipulation isn't confrontation, it's clarity. I think about that when the shop bell rings and when it doesn't, when the day is brisk and when it's slow. Clarity is what I fought for, in the well, in the records, in my own voice. Clarity is what let me say, without shouting or shaking, you wrote this, remember, and stand still while the truth did its work. The facts were louder than her charm. Sometimes I still open the binder labeled gravity. I don't do it to feel powerful. I do it to honor the version of me who made it, scared, grieving, but stubborn. She didn't wait to feel brave before she acted until she felt brave. If I could go back and whisper one line into her ear, I'd tell her this: you don't have to win today, you just have to document today. That's how you outlast storms. That's how you keep what's yours without becoming what you hate. A friend asked me if I would ever forgive Emily. I said I already had, in the only way that counts. I put down the weapons and picked up my life. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means you stop letting it run your calendar. I don't schedule my days around a war that's over. I schedule them around deliveries, tea breaks, and the small joy of finding the perfect piece of hardware in a drawer you forgot you organized. Live well. Let the paper speak. When I lock up each night, I press my palm against the door for a second, like a promise. The bell gives that little last jingle, and the shop goes quiet, and in that quiet I hear 2 things, my father's steady patience and my own. They are the same sound now. That's the ending I wanted, even before I knew there was a story to survive. Not a victory song. A reliable key.